Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, 74b of Masechtas Kiddushin, and we are starting 5 lines from the bottom of the page. The Gemara quotes a brisa towards the end of the line. It says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ben Tesha Shanim B'Yom Echad. You have a male who is at least 9 years old, 9 years in one day, and he is either a Ger Ammoni, he's either a Ammonite convert, Moavi, or a Moabite convert, Mitzri, an Egyptian convert, Vadomi, or an Edomite convert, Kusi, or he is a Kusi. The Kusis are the Shomronim, the Samaritans, who may have converted at some point. Vinasin, and Nasin is the Givonim, another controversial conversion nation. Chalal, and then we have, so those are all converts and or potential converts. Then we have Chalal, a product of a Kohen who was in a forbidden relationship, the son, Umamzer, and a Mamzer. So all of these people. So again, we're talking about a boy at least 9 years old. He's either a Ammonite convert, Moabite convert, Egyptian or Edomite convert, either a Kusi or a Nasin, which is a Givoni, he's a Chalal, or he is a Mamzer, Shebo ala Kahenis, that had relations with a Kahenis, the daughter of a Kohen, Ve'al Halavia, or the daughter of a Levi, Ve'al Bas Yisrael, or a regular daughter of a Yisrael, Pasluha. Any of them have relations with her, they pasel her, they disqualify her. What do they pasel her from? From, if in the case where she's the daughter of a Kohen, she may not eat truma anymore, and in the case where in all 3 cases, she may not marry a Kohen anymore. So basically, these are all people who a regular Jewish girl is not allowed to marry. She cannot marry a Ammonite or Moabite convert. They're not allowed to marry into the Kahal. She can't marry an Egyptian or an Edomite convert the first 2 generations of conversion. Only the 3rd generation and on are allowed to. She can't marry a Kusi or a Nasin. She can't marry a Chalal. Well, hold that. She could marry a Chalal, but it would disqualify. It's permitted, but it would disqualify her from marrying a Kohen in the future. And finally, she may not marry a Mamzer. So in all these cases, paslua. She becomes, if she has relations with any of them, marries them, or relations outside of marriage, she cannot no longer in the future marry a Kohen. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol shezaro posel. Any of these situations where the offspring would be posel, would not be allowed to marry a Kohen, so then it also would disqualify the woman involved in the relationship. Because she'ein zaro pasel, eno posel. But if there's any case that we just listed where the offspring would not be disqualified from marrying a Kohen, then the woman, the mother, would not either become disqualified through the intercourse, through the bia, through the relations that they had. So Rabbi Yossi comes and argues on the Tanakam, on the first opinion. We'll have to see what they're arguing about. What case will flesh it out. What case are they at odds on? And then we have a 3rd opinion, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, and this brings us to the top of the next page, Kol shata nose bita ata nose almanaso. That anyone whom he'd be able to marry, that a Kohen could marry the daughter of the relationship, so he's also allowed to marry the Almana, the widow. If let's say there was a marriage, and then he can marry the mother, basically, the widow. Because she'iyata nose bito, and in any situation where he would not be allowed to marry the daughter, iyata nose almana, so he would not be able to marry the widow, the mother, if she was married and her husband died. So, okay, so we have 3 opinions here, and the Gemara is going to explain what it is that they're arguing about. The first opinion says, in general, that if a man has relations with any of these types not any man, a convert from Ammon, Moab, Egyptian, Mitzri, Edomite, or if he's a Kusi or a Nasing, a Givoni, if he's a Halal or a Mamzer, he has relations with a woman, he disqualifies her from if she was the daughter of a Kohen, she can't eat Truma anymore, and no matter who she is, she can't marry a Kohen. That was the Tanakama. Rabbi Yossi said a rule, and he argued and he said, it depends. If the offspring would be puzzled for marrying a Kohen, then she can't marry a Kohen. But if the offspring could marry a Kohen, then she could also still marry a Kohen. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said that if he could marry the daughter, he could marry the almana, the widow. If he can't marry the daughter, he cannot marry the widow. So what are they arguing about? So ask the Gemara, Ma'ika ben Tanakama ben Rabbi Yossi. Let's start with the first two opinions. What is the difference between the Tanakama, the first opinion, and Rabbi Yossi? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mitzri Sheni Ika benayu. The difference would be if the man was a second generation Egyptian convert. Why would that make a difference? Because in that case, a second generation Mitzri convert is not allowed to marry a regular Yisraelis, right? He cannot enter the Kahal second generation, but third generation he is allowed to, which means that Zaro, his offspring, is allowed to marry. If he has a daughter, let's say, she would be allowed to marry a Yisrael, right? So and even a Kohen. So the second generation Egyptian convert is going to present a nafkamina, as the Gemara will explain. They both learn it out from the halacha taught by the Torah with regards to a Kohen Gadol marrying a widow. If the high priest marries a widow, the Tanakama Savar. So we know that when a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, the Torah tells us that it's mechalel her. The almana, the widow, becomes a halala. Both her and if she would have offspring, they would be halalim. So she becomes a halala. She cannot in the future marry a regular Kohen. It's forbidden for her to marry the Kohen Gadol, and now she can't marry a regular Kohen. And the children would be halalim. The daughters would not be able to marry Kohanim. The sons would not be able to serve as Kohanim. None of them would be able to eat truma. So that's that is learned from a basically explicit pasuk. So now we're going to try extrapolate from there to other cases of forbidden marriages that are forbidden by a law, by a regular and negative prohibition, like a widow to a Kohen Gadol. So each, the Tanakama, the first opinion, and Rabbi Yossi, they're both coming from there, but they have different conclusions. The Tanakama holds ki Kohen Gadol b'almana, that we should treat other forbidden marriages just like a Kohen Gadol who marries a widow. Ma Kohen Gadol b'almana, just like when it comes to a Kohen Gadol with a widow. Shebiyaso b'aveira, where the intercourse is forbidding, is an aveira. Uposel ba, and it apostles her. It disqualifies her from marrying a Kohen in the future and from eating truma. Afkol shebiyaso b'aveira posel. So to anyone, if the bia is an aveira, if the relations are forbidden, so then it's going to apostle will disqualify her. That's the Tanakama. So that's why the Tanakama said this whole list that that all of these, any of these types of people that we mentioned, if they would marry a nice Jewish girl, then who's part of Kahal, so then she would become that's forbidden. So therefore she would become disqualified from marrying a Kohen in the future. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yossi holds ki Kohen Gadol b'almana. Yes, we compare it to the Kohen Gadol who marries an almana, who marries a widow, but we make the following conclusion: Ma Kohen Gadol b'almana shezaro pasal uposel. Just like when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, it's not simply that he's not allowed he's not allowed to marry this woman, and he pasels her. He also pasels the offspring. We learned that from the pasuk that the offspring become pasel as well for marrying Kohanim. They become chalalim. So afkol shezara pasel posel. So too, any case where we know that the offspring would be pasel, would be disqualified, then the woman involved in the relations would also be disqualified for marrying a Kohen. But if not, if it doesn't passel the offspring, if the offspring would be okay, so then the mother is not disqualified for marrying a Kohen. La'afuke, right, to the exclusion of Mitzri Sheni, a second generation Egyptian convert, Shein Zaro Pasel, whose offspring will not be Pasel. De Amarkra, because the pasuk is Banim Asher Yivadu Lem Dor Shlishi Yavol Lahem B'Kal Hashem. Torah says explicitly the third generation Egyptian converts are allowed to enter the Kahal. They're not Pasel. They don't carry the psul of the disqualification of the parents, or of the father. So Rabbi Yossi says that what we learned from the Kohen Gadol who marries the Almana, who has relations with the Almana, with a widow, it's forbidden, and yes, it disqualifies her, but it also, we know, disqualifies the children. And so Rabbi Yossi says it's only in a situation where the offspring are going to be pasel that we also say the mother's pasel. And that would be true in basically all these cases, but there's an exception, which is this, because a second generation Mitzri convert cannot marry into Kahal, but a third generation could, so that's a case where the offspring is not pasel. So therefore Rabbi Yossi says that case, not only is the offspring not pasel, but the woman who had the relations would also not become pasel. So he's basically saying that he agrees with everything the Tanna Kama said except for one point. If it was the Tanna Kama said a Egyptian convert, that if the male as an Egyptian convert has relations with a woman, any Kohen, Levi, Yisrael woman, she's disqualified from marrying a Kohen. So says Rabbi Yossi, not necessarily. Yes, if it's a first generation Egyptian convert, that would be true. But a second generation Egyptian convert, since the child of that relationship is allowed to marry Kahal, he doesn't carry the psul of the father, he doesn't carry the disqualification of the father. He's third generation convert. So therefore, the mother also does not become disqualified from marrying a Kohen. And then we have the third opinion. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Kol Shat Anosei Bito Atanose Almanasa. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says anyone who you can marry the daughter, that a Kohen can marry the daughter, he can marry the mother as well. Because she Atanose es Bito Atanose Almanasa. But if he can't marry the daughter, then he cannot marry the widow either. Ma'ika being Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. What is the difference? What is the difference between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? What's he adding? Amar Ula. So Ula says, Ger Ammoni Moavi Ikabenayu. The difference will be a Ammonite and Moabite convert. What's significant about that? So the rule is that a male Ammonite convert or a male Moabite convert is not allowed to marry into Kahal. But it does not apply to the females. Moavi v'lo Moavis, Ammoni v'lo Ammonis. Doesn't apply to the females. Female Moabite and Ammonite converts are allowed to marry regular Jews, like we see, but that Rus, who was a Moabite convert, married a regular Jew. So it works out as follows. So says the Gemara, Ushneim lo lamdu ela mikohen gadol be'almana. So again, both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, they're learning it from the case of a Kohen Gadol who marries a widow, which disqualifies both her and her children. And we're learning from there to other cases of prohibited marriages. To Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi holds Ki Kohen Gadol be'almana, that it should be just like a Kohen Gadol marries an almana. Ma Kohen Gadol be'almana shezara pasel uposel af kol shezara pasel posel. Like we said before, Rabbi Yossi says, just like when a widow marries a Kohen, their offspring is pasel, their offspring are chalal and chalalim. They carry the same psul. They carry that disqualification. They're chalal and chalalim. So too the mother becomes a chalala. That's when the offspring is pasel, then the mother is also pasel. But Rav Shimon Gamliel comes along and says, but there's another exception. Ki Kohen Gadol be'almana. Yes, we learn from a Kohen Gadol who marries an almana, but we say as follows: Ma Kohen Gadol be'almana shekol zaro pasal. A Kohen Gadol who marries an almana, all their children are pasal, both the men and the women, the girls and the boys. They both become chalalim. So avkol shekol zaro pasal. So when does the mother become pasal? If both any children that she has would be pasal. Afil nekevos, even the girls. La'afuki geramoni moavi, but that's the exclusion of a Ammonite and Moabite convert in nekevos havuk sheirus lava bekal, where the girls are actually allowed to marry into the kahal. The Amar Mar, as it was said, Ammoni v'Ammonis, Moavi v'Moavis, Ammoni and Ara Ammonis, Moavi and Ara Moavis. So Rav Shimon Gamliel says that yes, we're going to learn from Kohen Gadol and Almana. Kohen Gadol marries a widow. What the parameters are for when the woman becomes disqualified from kahuna, from marrying a Kohen, because that's what happens by a Kohen Gadol who marries an Almana. She's now disqualified from marrying a Kohen in the future because of that transgression. But Rav Shimon Gamliel says, but it's only if it's similar to that case. In that case, both of the children, whether it's boys or girls, would be disqualified. They would be chalalim. So says Rav Shimon Gamliel, only in a case where all the children, where kol zara, all the offspring would be pasal, so then the mother's also pasal. But in a case where not all the offspring would be pasal, like the case of a Ammonite or Moabite convert marries a regular Jewish girl, which is forbidden. They have a prohibition to come into the kahal, yes, but the offspring of that relationship are not necessarily going to be usher themselves to come into kahal. If they have a boy, yes, he's going to carry the name of a descendant of he's going to be a Moabite convert or Ammonite convert, next generation, but still, and he can't marry her into kahal. But the girls, they could. And therefore, Rav Shimon Gamliel says this is not part of that package, that we don't learn this from. We can't learn this case from Almana Kohen Gadol, from a widow who marries a Kohen Gadol. And in this case, Rav Shimon Gamliel says actually the woman would not be pasaled from kahuna, and she would still be, if she had relations with a Ammonite or Moabite convert, she would still be allowed to marry a Kohen in the future. Okay, the Gemara continues. It said, actually, let me just quickly summarize. So we have now three opinions, and they go as follows. The first opinion says that any situation where we learn from just like an Almana Kohen Gadol, just like a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a widow, and if he transgresses that prohibition, that lav, the wife, the widow, becomes prohibited from marrying a Kohen, disqualified. So to any case like that, any time a lav, there's a prohibited marriage, the woman will become disqualified from marrying a Kohen. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yossi says no, there's an exception to that. It's only when the offspring would be pasal. But if it's a second generation Egyptian, since the offspring would not carry the same psul, would not carry the same disqualification as the father, because a third generation Mitzri or Adomi convert is allowed to marry a regular Jew, so therefore the mother in that relationship also does not become disqualified. And Rav Shimon Gamliel says, in addition to that, there's another case that's an exception, which is only in a case where both the boys and the girls would become disqualified does the mother become disqualified. But if a male Ammonite or Moabite convert marries a regular Kahal girl, a Kohen Levi Yisrael, so because in that case if they would have a girl, a Moavis or an Ammonis, if they have a female daughter, they would have a daughter, she'd be allowed to marry into Kahal. So therefore, it's only in case where all the offspring would be disqualified does the mother become disqualified, but in a case where some of the offspring, like the girls, are permitted to marry Kahal, so the mother does not become disqualified. Therefore, Rav Shimon Gamliel holds if a Ammonite or Moabite male convert, marries a Kohen Levi Yisrael, she does not become disqualified for marrying a Kohen in the future. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chisda says, Hakol modim ba'almanas isa shepsula lekahuna. Everybody agrees by almanas isa. Almanas isa literally means the almana, the widow of a mixed up one. That she's pasal from kahuna. What do we mean by a mixed up, the widow of a mixed up one? What we mean, the isa here, the isa is like a dough mixture. So we're talking about where we are not sure what the status of the husband was. He may have been a halal, he may not have been, he's a safek halal, and this woman married a safek halal, which we're going in opinion that if he was a vadai halal, if he was a halal, she would become a halala. But Rav Chisda says that even if we don't know if he was a halal, she still becomes pasal from kuna. He says all three opinions in this price agree to that. How does he know? Because man mekol v'hani tonight. Who is the most lenient here? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is the most lenient here. V'ka amar, and he said, Kol shatanose bito, atanose almanasa. That the rule is, if you can marry the daughter, if a Kohen can marry the daughter, he can marry the mother. But because yata nose bito, yata nose almanasa. But if you can't marry the daughter, then he can't marry the mother. Limute mai, what would that exclude? Limute almanas isa shepsula lekahuna. That would exclude a almanas isa, the almana of a safek halal, the widow of a safek halal, that she would be pasal from kahuna, because the children we're not sure if the father was a halal or not. We have to be concerned that maybe he was, and therefore the children are safek halal, and we have to be stringent. And just like we have to be stringent on the children, we would then therefore the mother would be included, and since at the end of the day a Kohen cannot marry the children, so Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's rule would stand, and if you can't marry the children, you can't marry the mother, and the mother would be forbidden still. Now, why is this being pointed out? Lafuke midahani tanai. It's to the exclusion to argue on the following tanaim. Ditna, because we have a Mishnah. Hey, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira testified almanas isa regarding almanas isa again almanas isa, the almana, the widow of a safek halal, shekshera lekahuna, that she's actually allowed to marry a Kohen. So there's an opinion in a Mishnah in Edios that that in this the widow or the almanas isa, the widow of the safek halal, is allowed to marry a Kohen. My taima, what's the reason? Have a svek sveka, because it's a svek sveka, the svek sveka lakula, and when we have a svek sveka, we are lenient. Now, svek sveka usually means that there's a double doubt. In this case, Rashi in our Gemara doesn't learn that way. There are those who learn and try to explain how it's a double doubt over here, but Rashi has a different approach. That's not a double doubt. What we mean in this case by a svek sveka, we don't mean it's a double doubt, we mean it's someone else's doubt. In other words, we're trying to determine the status of this woman. Is she a halala? Well, what does it depend on? It depends on her last husband, if he was a halal or not. He was a safek, we don't know what he was. If he was a halal, then she's a halal and she can't marry a Kohen. But if he wasn't, then she's fine and she could still marry a Kohen. So, in this case, it's not her doubt, it's his doubt really. It's really the uncertainty regarding him that now carries over to her. So one way to explain this Gemara is that since it's not a suffix with regards to her, it's a suffix with regards to him, the doubt really has to do with him, and it's just carrying over to her, so there we could be lenient, we could give her maybe a cheskas kashrus, we assume her to be kosher until proven otherwise. Here we could be lenient. That's this opinion that's being quoted from the Mishnah in Edios, that svek sveka lakula. By svek sveka we don't mean a double doubt, we mean it's an extended doubt. It's really someone else's uncertainty that's carrying over and affecting her. So in that case, they hold that she's actually still allowed to marry a Kohen because we don't know if he was a halal. And misafek harav adar, we will actually allow her to continue to maintain her current status that she's nara halala. But our Mishnah that we're discussing now, our Brisa, Rav Chisda said, the three opinions in our Brisa all hold that actually she's not allowed to marry. Because even the most lenient one held that she would not be able to, that Almanas Isa would be disqualified from marrying a Kohen, and that's coming to argue on the Mishnah in Eidios. Okay. So we're in the wide lines. We're 5 lines down towards the end of the line. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Halacha ki Rabbi Elazar. The halacha is in accordance with Rabbi Elazar. I should go back to the Mishnah. The Gemara quoted the Mishnah, Vadan b'vadar mutter. So we have to go back to the Mishnah for a second. The Mishnah was on Ayin Hey Amar Aleph, Ayin Dal Amar Aleph, 74a. And the Mishnah had said, just to, on the most simple reading of it, that anyone who is Asur Lava B'Kal, anyone who's disqualified from marrying Kahal, they're allowed to marry each other. That was really the opinion of the first Mishnah as well, right? So a Shtuki or a Sufi who's a Safik Mamzer, they're not allowed to marry Kahal. They're allowed to marry a Mamzer. They're allowed to marry a Nasan, and vice versa. The Mamzer's allowed to marry them. Fine. That was the opinion of the Tanakama. That was the opinion of the original Mishnah and of the Tanakama of the Mishnah we had on Ayin Dal Amar Aleph on 74a. But Rabbi Elazar said, no. Rabbi Elazar said, only a Vadang b'Vadang mutter. Only 2 people who were certain are disqualified from marrying Kahal are allowed to marry each other. So a Kohen, a Mamzer, we're certain about him. And the Sinim, they're the Givonim, we're certain as to their status. So if you know he's for sure a Mamzer, for sure a Nasin, they can marry each other. Definite Mamzer can marry a definite Mamzeres. But a Safik, a Shtuki, or a Sufi cannot marry a definite Mamzer. As well, he said, Sveikan b'Sveikan. Sorry, so a definite one can marry a definite one. A definite one cannot marry a Safik one, nor can a Safik one marry a definite one, and even a Safik can't marry a Safik. One who might be a Mamzer cannot marry another one who might be a Mamzer, because it might be that really this one is and this one isn't. So, and then they're not allowed to marry each other. So that was the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. And now the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav, Halacha Rabbi Elazar. The halacha is like Rabbi Elazar, and a Shtuki and a Sufi are not allowed to marry a Mamzeres. When they said this over, or Rabbi Yehuda maybe is talking, when I said this over to Shmuel, Amar Li, he said to me, Hillel Shonet, Hillel Ta, Asar Yuchsim Alo Mi Bavel. There were 10 lineages that went out from Bavel, but Kulam Mutar Molav Bozeh Bozeh. And they're all allowed to marry each other. He doesn't actually mean all, because no reason why a Kohen, Levi, Yisrael should be allowed to marry a Mamzer. It's explicit in the Torah that they can't. He means all the ones that are not allowed to come into Kahal are allowed to marry each other. So basically, he's saying that Hillel taught that the halacha is not like Rabbi Elazar, rather the halacha is like the Tanakama, that they are allowed to marry each other. Shtuki and the Sufi can marry Mamzerim. Safek Mamzers can marry Mamzers. So this is what Shmuel responded. He said that Hillel taught that halacha. Ve'at amar halacha like Rabbi Elazar. You're trying to say that halacha is like Rabbi Elazar? That halacha is like the Tanakama, like the first opinion. That's what Shmuel said. So again, we have Rav passing like Rabbi Elazar that a Shtuki and a Sufi cannot marry a Mamzer, and we have Shmuel saying, what do you mean? Hillel said that they could, and that's the halacha. And you're saying that that's not the halacha, basically saying that is the halacha. Virami de Rav ad Rav. So says the Gemara, we can ask a contradiction from what Rav says here to another statement of Rav. Virami de Shmuel ad Shmuel. And we could ask a contradiction of Shmuel on Shmuel. De itmar, because it was stated, Arusa she'ivra, if an arusa gets pregnant, an arusa is a woman who's betrothed. She received Kiddushin. She doesn't have nisuin yet. She is not and cannot live with her husband yet. And she turns out she's pregnant. So, what is the status of that child? If we assume that it's from her chassan, her fiance, then the child's fine. But if it came from anywhere else, that's adultery. She may not be fully married to him, but she's still bound to him, and she can't have relations with anyone else. It would be a mamzer. So how do we treat this child? So Rav Amar Havlad mamzer. Rav says the child is a mamzer. Ushmuel Amar Havlad shtuki. And Shmuel says the child is a shtuki, is a suffix. Maybe the father is the fiance, in which case it's not a mamzer, but maybe it's someone else, in which case it is a mamzer. And the Gemara elaborates, Rav Amar Havlad mamzer umutter b'mamzeres. Rav says the child is a mamzer and can marry a mamzeres. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says Havlad shtuki. Now we look at the Vlad like a shtuki, a suffix mamzer, v'asr b'mamzeres. And they cannot marry a mamzeres. Now this seems to be exactly the opposite of what we said before in terms of the opinions of Rav and Shmuel, because Rav is now saying that even though this is really a doubt, we don't know who the father is. We don't know if the father is the fiancé, in which case the child is not a mamzer, or is the father someone min hashuk, someone from the market, so in which case the child would be a mamzer. And Rav says we could assume it's a mamzer, so much to the point that you can even marry a mamzeres. Meaning, even though it's really a suffix, we don't know for sure, but he says we treat it like a vadai, like a certain mamzer, you can marry a mamzeres. Now that contradicts what Rav said before. Before Rav said that we pass like Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar said if you have a doubt as to, you have a shtuki or a sufi, we don't know for sure they're a mamzer, they cannot marry a mamzeres. Rav saying this child, who we really don't know for sure if he's a mamzer, is allowed to marry a mamzeres. And Shmuel is also contradiction. Before we had Shmuel on record saying we pasking like the Tanakama, and a doubt, an uncertainty, a shtuki or sufi is allowed to marry a mamzeres. And now Shmuel is saying the Vlad is a shtuki, the asr b'mamzeres, and cannot marry a mamzeres. So it's both are contradictions. Says the Gemara, easy way to solve it, epuch. Flip it. And read as follows, Rav Amar Vlad shtuki. Rav will be the one who says the child, in this case, is treated like a shtuki, is uncertain as to their status. And if they're uncertain, and we want Rav to be consistent with what he said before, that the halacha is like Rebbe Lazar, when they're uncertain, they cannot marry a mamzeres. Ushmuel Amar Havlad mamzer, and Shmuel would say that the child is a mamzer. Again, just to remind ourselves, we're talking about an arusa she'ivra, a arusa, betrothed woman who became pregnant. So Shmuel will be the one saying, we assume that the father is not the arus, is not the fiance, and therefore there's adultery going on here, and the child's a mamzer, and he is allowed to marry, right? Because Shmuel said the halacha is like the Tanakama, and he's allowed to marry a mamzeres. Meaning, even though it's a doubt, he's allowed to marry a mamzeres. Because the Tanakama holds, shtuki and a sufi are allowed to marry a mamzeres. So the Gemara has Tarti Lamali. Why do I need... So fine, we flipped it. But why do I need them on record twice saying the same thing? In two places we have Rav pasking in like Rabbi Elazar that a suffix mamzer cannot marry a mamzeres. And then we have, and in two places of Shmuel on record saying that he could. So the Gemara says, tzricha. Both are necessary. Di'it marbaha. If I only said it on our Mishnah, b'hakam Rav, you would say that's where Rav says that the halacha is like Rebbe Lazar. We treat it like a suffix. A shtuki, a sufi is suffix mamzer, and they're not allowed to marry mamzeres. Maybe Rav only said that in a case like our Mishnah, mishum derov cheir metzla, because the majority of the people out there are kosher to her. Meaning our Mishnah is not talking about an arusa; it's just talking about a girl in general, a pnuya. She's unmarried, and she has a child. We don't know who the father is, so she's a shtuki or a sufi. The child is a shtuki or a sufi. So in that case, let's stick with the shtuki case, right? We know who the mother is. She's just not revealing who the father is. So in that case, she's a penuya. She's not married. So what are the chances that that this child is a mamzer? The only way it could be a mamzer is if she had relations with a very close relative, or with a mamzer. So it's not likely. Most of the men in the world are not her relatives, and they're not mamzer. So the chances are the child is a kosher. And so maybe that's where Rav said that this child, this shtuki, cannot marry, we pass like Rabbi Elazar, cannot marry a real mamzer, because what are the chances that he's also a mamzer? Not likely. Aval Hassam, but in the case of the Arusa, the betrothed woman, Derov Psulam Etzla, where most of the options in the world are puzzle to her and would make the child a mamzer. She's betrothed, she's Eishes Ish, she's as good as married, she has Kiddushin. So any other man besides her fiancé, the child will be a mamzer. So that's highly likely. So so you might have said that there Rav would agree that we should treat this child like a mamzer, because that's most of the world would produce, when most of the men in the world, the majority says that this is a mamzer. So maybe in that case, Rav would agree to Shmuel that Rav would agree that we should assume it's a mamzer and he should be allowed to marry a mamzeres. That's why we need the second case for Rav to bring out. No, even here, it's a doubt, so he cannot marry a mamzeres. Okay, so maybe we should have done it the other way. Why don't we flip it and say, so just tell me this more novel case where there's rov psulim, most of the people are puzzling, yet Rav still says that we don't treat it like a mamzer. But if we had said it just by that, b'hakam Rav, I would say, no. I would say the opposite. There Rav says that we have to assume that it's not a mamzer, mishum de'ika lemitla ba'aris, because there you have an aris, you have a fiancé. So it's true most of the people in the world would produce a mamzer, but the one that's most likely the father is the aris, and it wouldn't be a mamzer. So that's where, maybe that's where Rav would say that we should not assume that this is a mamzer, even though most men in the world that she could have relations with would mean it's a mamzer, but who do you think is the most likely? The aris, the fiancé, and therefore the child, we should not assume it's a mamzer, and he cannot marry a mamzeres. But in the case where it was a penuya, an unmarried woman, where there's no aris to assume, there's no fiancé, you might say that in that case, Rav would agree to Shmuel and say that we should assume it's more likely that the father was a pasul and the child is a mamzer, even though it's still not so likely because it would have to be again a relative or another mamzer. But maybe in that case Rav would agree to Shmuel. There's no aris, there's no fiance to assume that he's the father, so we have to be choshesh, concerned it's someone else who's actually pasul. Tricha. That's why even there we needed Rav to say that that's not the case. As if there's a doubt, there's a doubt. We don't know if this child is a mamzer and he cannot marry a mamzeres in accordance with Rabbi Elazar. Viba Yisema says the Gemara, if you want, you could say, Li'olam lo tebuch. Really, we shouldn't flip them. So again, let's just go back for a second. We started out here that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar is the opinion in the Mishnah who says that only vadais can marry vadais. A certain mamzer can marry a certain mamzeres. A definite mamzer can marry a definite givoni, nesinim, because those are definites. But suffix can't. Shtuki cannot marry a mamzeres. That's what Rav said. Now we pass him like Rabbi Elazar. Shmuel said no, we pass him like the Tanakh, like the first opinion, and they could marry each other. And then we asked, but we have them on record saying the opposite. In the case of the Arusa who became pregnant, the betrothed woman who became pregnant, there we have Rav saying that the child is a mamzer, which sounds like and could marry a mamzeres. even though it's really not necessarily a mamzer, we don't know if this child is a mamzer. But Rav saying, no, let's treat it like a mamzer, like it's definite, even though it's not definite, which implies Rav holds that an uncertainty could marry. A shtuki could marry a mamzer. That would be a contradiction. And Shmuel says the opposite. Shmuel said that no, the child is a shtuki, and the implication is that he's a shtuki and cannot marry a mamzeres, which would be contradicting what Rav said before. What Shmuel said before, because Shmuel said the halacha is like the Tanakama, and a shtuki is allowed to marry a mamzeres. So the first solution was, okay, we'll just flip Rav and Shmuel. In the second version of them, it was mixed up. They really said the opposite. Now the Gemara says, really no, it's not necessary to flip them. Umay mamzer tikam Rav. When Rav said that in the case of the Arusa She'ibra, the betrothed woman who became pregnant, that Rav said the child is a mamzer, Lav mutter b'mamzeres. He didn't mean it's a mamzer and allowed to marry a mamzeres. No, it's really a suffix, and he cannot marry a mamzeres. Rav, Lishitasa, Rav being consistent, he cannot marry a mamzeres. So why did Rav say he's a mamzer? Ela de asr bas Yisrael. Rav was saying we have to look at him like he might be a mamzer. He cannot marry a bas Yisrael. He can't, someone from Kahal. Ushmul amar havlad shtuki. And then Shmuel would be coming and saying that Vlad is a shtuki, is an uncertain mamzer. D'asr bas Yisrael, who can't marry a bas Yisrael. Ihachi hainu de Rav. If that's the case, then they're saying the same thing. If when Rav said he's a mamzer, he really meant he's a suffix mamzer, and therefore can't marry a mamzeres, and also can't marry a bas Yisrael, a regular Jew, a regular kahal member, and then Shmuel says no, he's a shtuki, he's a suffix mamzer. So. And what? And you can't marry a bas Yisrael. So what is Shmuel saying different than Rav? Elamai shtuki. So we have to say that when Shmuel said the Vlad, the child, is a shtuki, it means shemeshasking oso midin kahuna. What it means is that we silence him from having the status of a Kohen, if the Aros was a Kohen. Meaning what Shmuel is saying is that in the situation, let's say that our case was that she was betrothed to a Kohen, and then she got pregnant. So Rav says it's a mamzer. The child's a mamzer. We have to be choshish, concerned that the father is not the fiance, it's someone else, it's adultery, and the child's a mamzer. She cannot marry a bas Yisrael. He cannot marry a bas Yisrael. Shmuel says it's a shtuki. What does he mean by that? So we're suggesting what he means is mishasking oso midin kahuna. We silence him from the status of a Kohen, meaning it's true the father's the fiance is a Kohen, but we don't know for sure that he's the father, and therefore this child cannot be given the status of a Kohen. Says the Gemara Pshita. The Gemara says that's obvious. Hashta midin Yisrael mishaskin anle midin kahuna mibai. We don't even give him the status of Yisrael, of Kahal. We say he might be a mamzer. So there's a question, we're going to treat him like a Kohen. The whole point here is that we don't know for sure who the father is. Of course we don't give him the status of a Kohen. So that can't be what he's saying. Elamai shtuki. So what is he saying when he says it's a shtuki? Shemeshasking oso minichse aviv. What it means is we silence him from having a right to claim his father's possessions. If this Aros has possessions, so his children inherit them, this child, we don't know if he's a child, so he cannot get the possessions. Gemara says again, Pshita. That's obvious. Miyadinan avu amanu. Do we know who the father is? If the father has other children, they're not going to stand for this. We don't know. You want to give a Yerusha, our inheritance, to some guy who we don't even know that he's our father's child? That, of course not. He would have to prove it if he wants to get a piece of the Yerusha, of the inheritance. The Gemara says, "Lo tzricha de tafas." You're right. That would be true. They won't give it to him. But what if he grabbed it? What if he seized he said, "That's my father, and I'm seizing the inheritance, my portion at least." So would we let him keep it or not? So that could be what the Gemara is saying, which we're saying no. He's a shtuki, meshaskin. We silence him from having a right to the inheritance. He can't have a right because we don't know for sure that this Aros, this fiance, was really the father. That's one possibility of what Shmuel meant. V'baisem, or if you want, you could say my shtuki beduki. That shtuki means beduki, the one who's investigated. Shebotkim asimo, that we check the mother, we inquire. V'omeres, and she says lekasher nivalti, and if as long as she says that the father is a kasher, ne'amenes, she's believed. So on the contrary, maybe Shmuel is saying, when he says the child is shtuki, what he really means is he's kasher. He's beduki, he's kasher. And that's what so Rav is saying the child we have to consider the possibility the child's a mamzer and he cannot marry a Yisraelis, a member of the Kahal. And Shmuel would be saying, no, he's a shtuki beduki, meaning we trust the mother. If she says it's a kasher, the father's a kasher, then we assume the child's kasher and he could marry into Kahal. That would be what Shmuel would be saying. So ask the Gemara, Kiman Rabbi Gamliel. So then is Shmuel just repeating the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel? Ha'amar Shmuel chadazimna. Shmuel's already taught us the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel. It's not because we're learning a Mishnah, Haisamu Beres, if a woman was pregnant, V'amrula, and they asked her, Mativo shalu berzeh, what's the status of this child you're carrying? And she says, Me'ish ploni b'kohen hu. The father is so-and-so, he's a Kohen. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, Omrim ne'emanes. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say she's believed. Rabbi Shomer, Enga ne'emanes. And Rabbi Shua says she's not believed. Ve'amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Halacha like Rabbi Gamliel. Halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel, that we believe her. So we have on record Shmuel saying that if you have a pregnant woman, and she says the father's a kasher, you think she says the father's a Kohen. And then Rabbi Gamliel says we believe her. And Shmuel says that's the halacha. So we have Shmuel already on record saying that we trust her. So why would Shmuel come along again and say, in this case, that if you have a woman who's pregnant, and she's betrothed, and she says the father is a kasher, that we believe her, that's just repeating this opinion once again. Says the Gemara, Tzricha. No, we need both statements of Shmuel. Dime Hasam, if all we had was, like he said, Allah is like Rabbi Gamliel, I would have said Hasam Rov Ksherim Etzla. In that case, it's talking about an unmarried woman, a Penuya, where most of the world is kasher to her, and most men in the world. And therefore, if she says it was a kasher, we could believe her. But over here, Derov Psulam Etzla, here she's betrothed. Most men are disqualified from her. There's only one man in the world who's permitted to her. So maybe Ema lo. So you might have said that we shouldn't believe her if she says L'kasher nivalti. Tzricha, that's why Shmuel had to say no. We believe her. She's a shtuki beduki. The shtuki is really a beduki, and she's trusted if she says it. And that's what Shmuel could be coming to tell us. So we have in this second approach, where we didn't flip Rav and Shmuel, we have Rav saying that if you have an arusa, a betrothed woman who becomes pregnant, and so that child, Rav says is a mamzer, we have to be concerned that she had adultery and the child is a mamzer. He's not going to go so far as to say she can marry a mamzer. He can marry a mamzeres because it might not be a mamzer. The father might be the fiance, but he cannot marry a bas Yisrael because he might be a mamzer. And Shmuel says no. He's a shtuki. What's a shtuki? The Gemara had two answers. One is that we even if he seizes the father's possessions and inheritance, we silence him from that. We say you can't have it. Or shtuki may actually be beduki. He's checked. He checks out that Rav would say. That Shmuel is paskening, is ruling that we would trust the mother if she says that the child is a kasher. Okay, we'll hold here.